All right, wait another minute, but this is on this topic and on this particular entity, the first of what we will be organizing and discussing and strategizing on. That's the plan. So there will be opportunities to involve others, and certainly Dennis would have some pretty amazing insights. All right, so, yes. If you have not had a chance to read that book of his, Division of Light and Power, well worth the read.
Excellent.
A thriller. I mean, it is a thriller.
Will I need to, I won't need to be a co-host to share my screen, will I?
I can make you co-host.
Okay.
So,
well, I was like, you have to do it now, just when my part is. But go ahead.
Okay, I'll do that when we start. Okay, so I think we will begin. We have already recorded, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time on this first day of June to participate in this online gathering in which we explore the question, can we pull the plug on First Energy? My name is Greg Coleridge. I'm with the Move to Amend Ohio Network, and just gazing out amongst those of you who have joined us this evening are some fellow compatriots who are currently on the coordinating committee of the Move to Amend Ohio Network, including Sandy Bolsinius, Carla Rautenberg. I see Dave Lima here, and I thought I saw Catherine Terser, at least somewhere. She was on here, probably missing her. Oh, okay. Anyway, appreciate the help that they have provided in planning this event. So welcome. Before we begin, just a couple of logistics. Please, if you haven't already done so, mute yourself at the moment to prevent any background noise from taking place. There'll be an opportunity, if you so desire, later on after the presentations to weigh in, which you can do either verbally by unmuting yourself, or if you don't want to do that, and if you want to participate by unmuting yourself, you will notice at the very bottom of the screen, you will see a little reaction icon with the word underneath it. If you click on it, you can raise your hand, probably your old hands at doing that. But just to say, for those of you who want to participate in that way, that's the way to do it. There's Catherine. If you would rather provide some comments or questions non-verbally, you can do so in the chat at any time, either during presentations or afterwards. And I will try to monitor that, and maybe Dave, who in previous calls of the Ohio Network has done such a stellar job at that, calling on you here just all out of the blue to say maybe you can help me monitor the chat for comments or questions. So with that in mind, let's begin. $1 billion taken from Ohio taxpayers, $60 million taken from Ohio ratepayers, 18 lawsuits, over $60 million in bribery payouts to bail out antiquated fossil fuel energy plants, the largest corrupt scheme in Ohio history. Bludgeoning what little representative democracy we ever had to begin with. What are we talking about? Why, of course, First Energy Corporation and their role in jamming HB 6 down our collective throats, we being Ohio residents, with an added bonus of interfering with the effort of Ohioans during the pandemic to reverse this outrageous legislation via a citizen referendum. All those responsible for the scandal need to be held accountable. This includes not only Larry Householder and all those recipients of the bribes, and it not only includes individual executives of and at First Energy Corporation, but it also includes First Energy Corporation, the artificial legal entity created by the state through a charter or license that through its spokespersons have admitted guilt in this corrupt scandal. But how? Is bad publicity enough accountability? Is a teensy weensy bit more of regulation enough? What about monetary fines? Or how's this for an idea? Pulling the plug on the legal entity itself, metaphorically. Something that Attorney General David Yost is currently exploring by pulling the plug, basically pulling or yanking its charter, meaning dissolving the company. What does this mean? Is this realistic? How could we ever turn on our lights or heat our electric homes without First Energy in our midst? These are the questions that we will be exploring and discussing this evening. And joining us to do that exploration and engaging in discussion are our speakers this evening. The program, I'll just introduce them in a minute. The program is that Philena Farley with the Ohio Green Party and Mike Ferner, former member of the Toledo City Council, as well as the program on corporations, law and democracy, and currently coordinator of Lake Erie Advocates, will each, beginning with Philena and then followed by Mike, sort of share their reflections on these questions and anything else that they care to comment on for 10 minutes each. That'll be followed by comments or questions from all of you. And again, that can be either in person by being acknowledged and unmuting yourself and sharing your question or comment briefly, if I can respectfully add, or just putting it in the chat. And we'll go, 30, 45 minutes for that. And then at the end, just sort of an invitation to take action that I will share and then provide both Philena and Mike 5 minutes each to provide based on, the overall questions and comments and sort of having an opportunity to reflect on everything that went on, 5 minutes each to wrap up. So with that, I would like to call first on Philena and then Mike to take up this topic, this very timely issue, and figure out what we need to know, and just as importantly, from your perspective, what we need to do. So welcome, both Philena and Mike. Philena, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, this has been such a crazy issue for us, particularly in Ohio, because it's unique, but not so unique to the corruption in Ohio. And the Ohio Green Party itself has been calling to, consumer protections and environmental protections. And as a grassroots political party, we believe that prevention and justice is at the heart of consumer protection. And millions of lives will be saved or lost depending on the strength of our consumer protection laws. And we have to aim to stop utility corporations from defrauding Ohio citizens, but they will continue endangering us while we're paying for another dubious experiment to develop small nuclear reactors called the Advanced Nuclear Reactors by E-Generation. So if we don't put an end to First Energy, they're just going to keep going. They're going to keep trying, because just finding them is not enough. Just firing the people that did the bribe is not enough, because all they have to do is just revamp it and paint it a different color. Is almost what I'm going to say. Like, take a stolen car, paint it a different color or something. That's what they're doing with this new HB 434 bill. So we have to start demanding real penalties. And I do like the idea of the Attorney General revoking the licensing, the corporate charter. Another thing we can also look into is putting pressure on vendors and contractors to no longer do business with First Energy. That is another area we can make them unpopular to do business with. And that's something that would take a lot of grassroots support and organizing, but we can't do that. That no one would no longer want to work with them. So that's two things. We can work on reversing the corporate charter and put pressure on not wanting to do business with First Energy. And we learned a lot about putting pressure on not doing businesses because of the Black Lives Matter protests and George Floyd, and you know, everywhere we look, we're seeing these oppressive systems collapsing. They're getting exposed. Just recently, you know, people are just now starting to understand what we meant by defunding the police. But why did so many young lives have to be lost? Why did so many lives have to be lost for people to finally understand what we meant by defunding the police? So it is a frustrating, but we know we're making some strides. But at the same time, with this new Anthem Act on top of the First Energy thing, that we have to show that it's getting out of control. It's really getting out of control. So I wanted to show you guys this clip that was just done last night by Sabby Sabs of the Black Revolution Network. And it's amazing that she mentioned this just yesterday. So I'm going to play this clip for you right quick. And she was talking about Ralph Nader. So her talking about Ralph Nader and everything he warned about, for some reason, made her bring up Citizens United. So I wanted you guys to check it out. So give me 1 second here.
I just made you co-host. Oh, okay, you got it.
Got it? Okay, yep. Okay, here we go.
Can't hear it, however.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Oh, I muted the video. Okay, sorry.
This is why something like Citizens United should have never happened. And why are we not fighting against that? That seemed to be more of a thing back when Bernie Sanders was running. We have to push back against Citizens United. Now that there's no campaign, it seems like people just forgot about it. We don't need to talk about it anymore. No, this is still an issue. The money is still a problem.
There you go. And boy, is that a problem for us in Ohio. So I just wanted to, I was just so happy that you guys, this group especially, is really pushing this envelope, because we know that if we don't address Citizens United, this is just going to keep happening. It's just, it gets worse and worse. So my suggestion was, of course, revoking the charter, but also putting pressure on other businesses and vendors to not even do business with First Energy anymore. That's actually a good strategy. I think that it's worth exploring.
Great. Well, thank you, Philena. Appreciate those comments, appreciate the clip, and look forward when Mike is finished to having others provide some comments, because there's some heavy hitters on this call who have a wealth of experience and investment of time and energy and commitment in dealing with First Energy and nuclear energy and nuclear power and fossil fuel energy as well as exploring alternatives. So, but before doing that, let's shift. Mike Ferner, previously as introduced. Greetings, Mike. Take it away.
Nice to be here. Hi, everybody. As Greg just mentioned, there are some very knowledgeable people on the call, and at least a few old hands that I recognize: Connie Klein, Kevin Camps, Mike Keegan, who've been around the block a few times on this issue, and probably others that I've not had the pleasure of working with yet. But also, I wanted to recognize fellow Toledoan Nancy Larson, who is on the call, and she's running for the state legislature for the Ohio House. And if we can get her in there, you can bet that she's going to be a voice for calling out the misdeeds of utility companies and others as loud as possible. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Just a bit about my background. In 1974, I helped organize the Toledo Coalition for Safe Energy, and we worked for quite a few years against nuclear power and rate increases from that time Toledo Edison, which has now been swallowed up by at least 2 or 3 mergers. And in doing that, we were formally involved. We were interveners before the Public Utilities Commission, the Ohio Power Siting Commission, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we went through the regulatory grinder any number of times. We picketed, petitioned, debated, and did all the typical things citizens groups did then and still do. And keep in mind, this was prior to the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, reviving the history of real citizen power, the power to invoke the corporate death penalty. But first, I want to start off with a classic quote from Cleveland's mayor, Tom Johnson. And I had this hanging on my wall in my city council office, and it's been here in my house for a long time. Anyway, his quote is from early 1900s, and he went to battle with Cleveland Electric Illuminating many times. His quote is, "I believe in the municipal ownership of all public service monopolies, because if you do not own them, they in time will own you. They will rule your politics, corrupt your institutions, and finally destroy your liberties." And if that's not a summation of what we have seen with House Bill 6 and the bribing of state legislators, I don't know what is. But we're here dealing with a privately owned utility and what's to be done about its transgressions. Our topic tonight is how to revoke the charter of First Energy Corporation, which is a tall order. So it would be helpful to know how this was handled in the past when corporate charters were yanked on a pretty regular basis. And not to be content to support whatever Ohio intends to do to punish this company for wrongdoing, if it's something short of pulling their corporate charter and dissolving the company. Greg Coleridge put together this handy booklet that some of you may have seen a few years ago, and I find it useful over and over again. So I highly recommend it. He did a lot of research, pulling out the history of corporate charters and citizens fighting corporations and the legislature and the courts revoking corporate charters. And I wanted to read just a bit from there to give you a feeling of what the prevailing mood was in the time, because it's so important how we see ourselves and our abilities to affect change if we're going to really strive for something that's worth doing. Here is legislation that was passed in 1842 by the Ohio legislature. It repealed the charter of the German Bank of Worcester. And the language in that legislation repealing the charter said in part, "It shall be the duty of the court to restrain said bank, its officers and agents, from paying out or in any way disposing of the monies of the bank, and force the bank commissioners to close the bank and deliver full possession of the banking house, keys, books, papers, and monies. Said bank of the said bank." The legislature said that the bank commissioners shall possess the power common to sheriffs and may break open any building in which property, money, books, papers, or effects of the said bank may be. And if the said bank has made any assignment or transfer of property or papers or money for the purpose of avoiding the operations of this law, it shall be deemed absolutely void. Violators, corporate officers, upon conviction shall be imprisoned in the penitentiary and kept at hard labor, not less than 1 nor more than 10 years. So they not only had the power to break into the bank if necessary, but some pretty stiff penalties for the bank officers if they tried to abscond with the goods. This is in 1890, a court decision revoking the charter of a corporation. And this is a court section from a court decision. The corporation has received vitality from the state. It continues during its existence to be the creature of the state. It must live subservient to its laws and has such powers as those laws have bestowed upon it and none others. As the state was not bound to create it in the first place, it is not bound to maintain it. If it violates the laws of the state or misuses its franchise to oppress the citizens. And here's one of my favorites. This is from a 1900 court decision. The time has not yet arrived when the created is greater than the creator, and it still remains the duty of the courts to enforce the laws, no matter how ingenious the pretexts for their violations may be, nor the power of the violators in the commercial world. If that doesn't speak to today's case, I don't know what does. The acts of the defendant have been persistent, defiant, and flagrant, and no other course is left to the courts than to enter a judgment of ouster and appoint trustees to wind up the business of the company. And a further court decision from 1910. A court cannot concern itself with the rights of stockholders, but can only consider whether some public mischief is being done or threatened. And here's one that talks about what should be the punishment for a company that is so grievously violated the law. And this is from 1926. Court decision says, in dealing with the subject of criminal prosecution as an adequate remedy, it was stated by the judge in this case, quote, that remedy is not adequate. Criminal prosecution is not adequate. The object of the statute is to protect the public. A small fine is not a sufficient deterrent to accomplish the desired end. And again, they must have liked this language. The time has not yet arrived when the created is greater than the creator, and it still remains the duty of the court to enforce the laws, no matter how ingenious the pretext for their violations, nor the power of the violators in the commercial world. So it seems to me we have a very solid history. I'll leave it to Greg to enlighten us on which parts of the revocation laws are still available for use. And obviously we need to get into the question of what's the Attorney General proposing, and is that something that's significant enough? And how can we, as a citizens organization, make sure that an example is made of this company and get their charter revoked? So thank you very much for your kind attention and for inviting me, and look forward to the discussion.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the presentation and those quotes. And you know, the time has still not yet arrived when the created is greater than the creator. And that's something that we need to be mindful of. The challenge is as much cultural as it is legal and constitutional, that we have to first understand and acknowledge our own power and authority to rule, to govern, to decide, to define what our subordinate entities, those being legal creations of the state, corporate entities, are. It's up to us, and it should be up to us. It should have always been up to us. It is always been up to us. It's just much of it has been forgotten. Much of it has been buried Much of it has been, made certain that we don't understand that this is a democratic tool that we can use and should be using regularly. So in a sense, it's normal. At one time was considered to be pretty much a default when companies acted beyond their stated authority as listed in their charter. So anyway, there's a link if anybody would like to get a copy of that research we put together. Feel free to reach out. And we can get into it. I'll just say something very briefly about where things stand. There has been a reach out. Several organizations did send a letter pretty early in the year in January to the office of David Yost, Attorney General, calling on him to initiate charter revocation proceedings. It's called quo warranto. It's a Latin term for by what authority. And in many state constitutions, there is that provision, as it is in the Ohio Constitution. It still exists. The Ohio Constitution, in terms of defining democratically what corporations should do and can do, have been watered down, but there still are a few provisions, that being one. And when reaching out to him, we were pretty surprised thereafter to learn that under the Ohio Corrupt Practices Act, that the Attorney General's office has, in fact, initiated filed a legal suit calling for the dissolution of First Energy. That is now being held up in court. What's legally called it's a stay, and so it's sort of in a holding pattern at the moment. Part of what people are trying to do, and I will share with you, maybe some of you are already familiar with this. We have put together a petition calling on the Ohio Attorney General to dissolve First Energy. It is as much an educational tool as it is a political movement tool. There is the link. If you haven't signed it, please do so. Either way, if you haven't signed it, not only do so, and if you have signed it, in both cases, please share it far and wide with your networks. We'd love to have, 1,000 or 2 signatures before we send them his way. There's some other ideas in the offing. We can get into that here afterwards, but at this point, would like to open it up. So if you would care, and again, Dave, if you could help me out going through the chat, if anyone has made a relevant comment or question, we can share those. But in addition, if you would like to share a brief comment or ask a brief question, again, go down to reactions, hit raise your hand, and I will try to find you and call on you, and then we can proceed. Before doing it, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a comment. There aren't any questions or comments in the chat at the moment, so I would suggest the raising of the hand and people unmuting to ask their questions.
Yep. Go ahead, Mike.
I wanted to make a quick point about the organizing that it'll take to revoke a charter. Now we need to be clear on what the Attorney General is talking about, and if we think that is sufficient, and getting behind that effort, or if that isn't sufficient, or if it stalls out or gets thwarted, what we can do to initiate a quo warranto action to revoke the charter. But there are a lot of good, experienced organizers on this call. And we all know how much time we have spent fighting utility rate hikes and transportation of nuclear waste, and on and on and on in regulatory agencies, and how far that gets us. I'm not saying that work isn't important, but this is a extremely rare golden opportunity to cut the root and not the branches for a change. And if we decide that we need to either mobilize to support the Attorney General or start an action of our own, it's going to require a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I personally, I think it would be well worth the investment of our time and energy to prioritize a charter revocation, because this is such a clear and egregious violation, and use that as an example of what can be done, which would put us light years beyond anything that we're going to achieve in a regulatory framework. That's it.
Yep, thanks, Mike. I see Connie. Your hand is up. Please unmute yourself. Ask your question and then put down your hand.
I actually have a couple of questions. What has there been any media coverage of this effort? I know we can't get media coverage on House Bill 434. I did put some updated information in the chat on House Bill 434 and some other Senate Bill 307, which wants ratepayers to pay the utilities to build electric vehicle charging stations. But I'd like to know what kind of timeline is foreseen for this effort, whether there's been any media coverage, because I haven't seen any, and whether a lawsuit has been looked into. So those would be the three questions.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for putting this on.
Yeah, well, thank you, Connie, for being here, for asking questions, and for your good work. In no particular order and response, there has been a little bit of media coverage in the chat, a couple of articles that appeared in the Ohio Capitol Journal that got a little reaction. Heard back from a number of people in both cases. I wrote one, Gary Hauser, a longtime friend and associate who goes way back here in Ohio. Bill, down in Athens, you may know Gary was involved in the nuclear weapons freeze campaign back in the 80s. He also wrote an article that was published in Ohio Capitol Journal. I, on Ohio, Kathy Ann Kowalski, put a little blurb in one of her pieces, back in February or so, and did a little follow-up afterwards about where it stands and mentioned the petition and the like. And one of the articles that Gary wrote, the op-ed, had the petition. So we've gotten a little bit, but nothing in sort of the corporate media, I would say, in terms of the dailies around the state or any editorial or anything like that, at least yet. Other, in terms of your other questions,
Yeah.
John
Yeah.
Oliver. Well, just before finishing, John Oliver gave a little shout out to First Energy. You may have seen that. So got a little bit of media attention there. In terms of lawsuit, we're waiting to see what happens with Yoast before proceeding. It should be said that there are a number of ways that charters can be revoked in terms of the initiative for that. One is we're starting with Yoast to initiate revocation proceedings, which he can do. And we're trying to milk that for all that it's worth. But it's not the only way that a charter can be revoked. The state legislature can call on the state by passing, now we know the cast of characters at the moment, but at least in charge at the state level, but at least in terms of, again, getting the issue out there, planting the seeds, trying to establish a narrative, trying to popularize, trying to normalize, and trying to, as Mike said, take advantage of this opportunity in which First Energy should be seen as nothing more than basically an egregious corporate criminal. This is a great opportunity where any single state legislator can initiate charter revocation, can at least call on, so they can introduce legislation calling for First Energy to be revoked. So that's a second way. A third way is that any single, at least in Ohio, any single county prosecutor, so Ohio has 88 prosecutors, any single one of them can call on the state to initiate charter revocation proceedings. So we're going to work our way up or down, depending on how you want to look at it, beginning with Yoast, and see what we can do. But certainly on the table, not far off, is to trying to approach a state legislator who has some backbone, who is willing to take this on. Okay, I see a couple of hands. Oh, Dave, you had wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, well, Russ Buckby asks, in the cases Mike Ferner read, they referred to the court, yet they were acts passed by the legislature. Can you clarify that, Mike? You're muted.
Yep, Mike, you're muted.
Yeah. The first one I cited about repealing the charter of the German Bank of Worcester, that in our booklet says that was a legislative act. The other ones, I believe the quotes were all out of court decisions, and the footnotes in the booklet would tell you which ones, and if somebody is interested and doesn't have this booklet yet, I can send you those citations.
Great. I did see, before going to others who have their hands up, who was it that asked? And Kevin did. Can anybody sign this, whether they're in the state or not? I guess it'll have more weight, of course, if they are within the state. But let's face it, First Energy does supply some power, right? One of the plants being bailed out of HB6 was an Indiana plant. So what the heck? Pass it around far and wide. We'd like it to be in the state, but why not out of state? Sandy, and then Russ.
If Russ wants to go first, I think he already asked this question though.
Oh.
Russ, you can go first.
Okay, well, I'm wondering about, I think this makes good sense to resolve the charter, but I'm sure one of the major questions is going to be, what will replace it? Somebody has to assume the assets of the corporation and continue to manage the electrical supply. And, so that's a whole big restructuring with a new corporation. And I wonder if anybody's thought about how that will go or how to respond to the questions people will raise about them.
Okay, Philena, Mike, either one of you or both of you want to respond to that?
I'd like to respond to it, and Philena and Greg may have other insights into it. But my understanding is that revocation would be accomplished similar to a bankruptcy, where a director or a committee of directors is appointed to oversee the business of the company while the assets are, a determination is made of what should be done with the assets. And let's keep in mind, we do not need a corporation in order to generate electricity. That's clear from the public power example that we have. So, and I know if this goes anywhere, the company's going to holler and scream that we're all going to freeze to death in the dark. But that's just simply not the case. I mean, you can look at all of the companies that have gone through bankruptcy in the last few years, and how many of them have come out of bankruptcy and actually done better. So there's quite a track record of this process under a different name.
Okay. Philena, do you have anything to add?
Not really, because I think that after the judge ordered the disclosure of who was sanctioning the money to be laundered, there was another company that was already taking over First Energy's responsibilities in Ohio. So I think that would be still going on. I don't think it would affect the other company that has taken over as so far. And I'm not sure if it will affect Ohio Edison, since that's supposed to be the partnered energy supplier within First Energy for Ohio. So I don't see if Ohio Edison being, you know, just disposed of or something.
Right. Sandy.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. I was just thinking, combining what everybody's saying. I mean, it seems like there's a somewhat of a clear-cut triple threat action that we can have to revoke this charter. One is media attention to what's going on here, which is not hard because everybody's complaining about their utility bills. It's ridiculous how high they've raised in a short period of time. And that could be done by rallies in different cities and in small towns, really. Letters to the editor, press releases. And also I was thinking, Nancy Larson's on the call. There's other people who are really working, other candidates for office who really are out there working for the people and trying to get in office. This could be a platform for them to tell what they're all about. So that would be one of the triple threat. The other one, consumer boycott. Philena, you mentioned that. I really like the idea of consumer boycotts. I just don't know who, what names. And then all of this could be, and then, we're focusing, this whole issue is about revoking the charter. But talking about the electricity bills and having an action like consumer boycott, I think would draw people into the discussion. And I also think we could frame this as others do to everything else, tough on crime. If you're not tough on crime, there's no accountability. The people, the criminals, those bad guys will just keep doing it over and over again. Well, in this case, I kind of agree.
Yep. Comments, Mike, Philena?
Yeah, it depends on, I don't think contractors or vendors bid on anything with First Energy. If they do, that should be public knowledge, but if not, I think a decent lawyer can pull up who contracts with First Energy. And it can be as simple as the maintenance contract or the cleanup crew, and just make it impossible for them to do business. And then use what Joyce might do to deter businesses from doing business with First Energy because they're about to lose their charter. We're like, hey, they're about to lose their charter. Why would you still do business with them? So it can work both ways. So it's like you're threatening other businesses like, hey, this business is about to lose its charter in Ohio. Why are you still doing business with them? So it's a great angle and it puts pressure. It'll make people leave the company themselves. That's another pressure.
I would just like to add a critical comment about the strategy of consumer boycotts. They can be effective. They certainly sound like a good idea, and like I said, it can be effective. They take a huge amount of work, especially when they're companies that may not be so publicly identified and sensitive to a consumer boycott. I mean, in other words, we're not boycotting Campbell soup here. So these companies, it takes a big strategy and a lot of effort and coordination to make a consumer boycott effective.
I'll just add before going to Carla there, I could be woefully mistaken here. And so any lawyers on the call who know anything about utility law, please correct any mistake I may be about to utter. But I believe that, utility corporation is not just a corporation, right? Any old corporation, but the mere fact that it is a utility means that by definition, it has a monopoly, virtual. It's not quite as severe as it used to be or wholly monopolistic as it used to be. But by having that kind of status, certainly this is true at a municipal level. I'm not quite sure if it's true at a state level, where monopoly utilities at a state level are given a franchise to operate in a certain geographic area. And maybe that's more local. Well, franchises, in essence, are sort of an agreement for a certain period of time that you have the sole, or basically almost the sole, ability to do business. So short of revoking a charter that would just put the whole bloody business out of business, would be to revoke their franchise, to end their franchise. This has happened in a number of instances elsewhere around the country, where utilities, that have been sort of, that started out to be public, went private, have become remunicipalized. And sometimes communities have had to pay dearly for that remunicipalization, but it has happened. And the alternative basically to a private utility is, of course, a public one. And public ownership of a commons like a utility is something that many communities around the country find very normal. So anyway, Carla.
Everybody. Yeah, I think we want to be careful before we talk about boycotting First Energy when they do have this monopoly. If you want to lose 99% of the people in Ohio, just talk about boycotting the provider of their electricity. Everybody knows they can't live without electricity. So I really think consumer boycott of First Energy may not be a positive thing to talk about. And I would like Mike and Greg and Philena to address that. I think there has to be some other mechanism that we use. And I would like to see public utilities, but many people don't want to see that. So what are other alternatives? Thank you.
Mike, Philena?
Well, and I have a question for Philena. My impression was she was talking about boycotting the companies who do business with First Energy, and I'll let her respond to that. But going back to your point about the franchises, these are usually very long-term. Toledo has got a franchise with First Energy, and it was renegotiated poorly about 20 years ago for God knows how many years, probably 90 years or something. But there are any number of municipalities that may have their own franchises that may well have sooner expiration dates. And when those expiration dates come around, everything's back on the table, but very few people in municipal government understand this concept.
Yeah, as Dennis Kucinich talked about in his book. Philena?
Yeah, I don't recommend, boycotting utilities or putting out there, we're actually boycotting the utility versus boycotting a corrupt corporation from doing business. The utility will still be operated by either Ohio Edison or I think there was a Toledo chapter that took it over while the disclosure of HB6 went on. So it's more about getting rid of or putting pressure on getting rid of this First Energy monopoly that goes across, what's it, about 10, 15 states. That idea, not the actual boycotting your electric bill. That's not effective. So yeah, it's more about boycotting the corporation's monopoly of electricity. So, and getting other companies that work with the First Energy to no longer want to be a part of the scandal. and pull out. You can dissolve first energy from within as well, is what I mean. Not boycotting electricity. So no consumer boycott. It's not exactly that way, but
Thank you.
Got it. Frank Rebar, you are muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hello. Yeah, I was, First Energy has a lot of subsidiaries, and what First Energy's franchise really controls is the distribution of electricity, not so much the generation of it. It does control a lot of generation. Ohio also has a lot of generation from American Power, but there's Cleveland Electric and CEI, whatever, what is it? Cleveland Electric and Illuminating in Ohio, Edison, etc. They do a lot of the distribution, and you can't really. Okay, first of all, you can't boycott that stuff. You can actually boycott the electrical suppliers. Most of the state has options where you can choose your electrical supplier,
Right.
and that really wouldn't hurt First Energy that much, because First Energy is trying to get out of what they call the unregulated business. Which is funny. They pushed hard for unregulated business back in the 90s. And they got it, and they decided now that they have competition, they can't compete, so they want to get back to being regulated by PUCO. Isn't that nice of them? But they do have a monopoly and franchises on the distribution. Now, as far as boycotting people that supply First Energy, that's kind of hard to, or use First Energy's energy. That's kind of hard to do. There's really not a, what do you boycott? You boycott aluminum, steel, manufacturing. I don't, kind of tough, but I just wanted to, First Energy's main thing here is actually distribution. That's probably where they're making most of their money now. That's never been unregulated. It's always been under the regulation of PUCO. And if First Energy was dissolved, it should really be a government run thing. I think I've always thought utilities distribution should be government owned and operated. And a lot of there used to be a lot of municipalities that generate electricity like Painesville, but most of those are gone now. They just gave it up. And that's all I got to say.
Well, thanks. Very enlightening, very insightful. There still is in Ohio quite a number of rural communities that, as far as I know, still have sort of public, and they have sort of pooled their energy needs together and have some kind of cooperative agreement, as do a number of states. And out west, of course, in California, a number of the larger communities have public power. Sacramento,
LA.
Yeah, a few others. So it is not unbeknownst, but a good point. And there are several good points raised, Frank. Just before going on, I think Connie, you had also asked, other kind of public strategies, and others had mentioned it. There has been talk. I'd be curious to find out if there would be interest among people in this group to at least spreading the word, if not helping, maybe organize some action in front of First Energy's headquarters, which is in Akron, at a time and date that would be convenient, that would make sense, that would be symbolic, maybe when there's coinciding with a court case, I don't know. But just in general, that has been suggested as at least something that could complement or supplement any of the other things being done to try to convince one or more of these elected officials, attorney general, state legislators, county prosecutors, to take action. Is that something that people might find informative and useful?
Sure.
Go ahead, Connie.
There was a dispatch article last month. I sent it around. I really didn't understand it. And I asked Jeremy Pelzer when I was talking to him about House Bill 434, about it, and I didn't understand his explanation either. But all of the Ohio electric utilities are raising not the ordinary increase in the amount you pay in the summer, but they're raising rates on top of that and justifying it sort of peripherally with Ukraine. So I'd like to know if anybody else knows anything about that. And I'll tell you the thing I would really like to see as a result of any pressure that's applied to, I call them first enema, as most people know, but any pressure that's applied to them, the result that I ultimately would like to see would be to force them to invest heavily in legitimate renewables, because the state of Ohio has absolutely eviscerated the General Assembly, the PUCO, two governors have absolutely eviscerated legitimate renewables here in the state. At one time, Ohio was, not that long ago, was 13th or 14th in wind power and wind investment in the country. So that's the ultimate, perhaps reasonable punishment, short of revoking their charter, that I would really like to see forced upon them to have some basis of legitimate renewable energy here in the state.
Comments? Mike, Philena?
Yeah, we might have any number of really legitimate, good, practical alternatives, secondary punishments, if you want to call them, or whatever. But I think it's important to maintain a focus on the revocation, because that has to do with fundamental power, exercising democratic power and showing for a change who runs the show. I mean, the difference between, for example, public power and an investor-owned company. You can have all of the programs that you want a privately owned utility company to do. You can ask and petition and legislate that they do A, B, C, and D, but the question of who's running the show is always the most important and the most fundamental question. And since we're not going to be able to really
I think we lost Mike
Yeah, he crashed.
in mid-sentence.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
What happens when you talk about democratic power from the bottom up? They cut you off.
Yeah. Every time.
Philena, you want to pick that strand up?
my parachute didn't even open when I crashed.
Oh, okay, you're back.
No, I'm saying that just to draw it to a close, the importance of focusing on who's running the show, who's controlling what happens, and whether that is done under private auspices or democratically controlled. And it would be wonderful to force First Energy to become a public power system. I have no idea how that might even happen, if at all. But short of that, focusing on this revocation is a way of focusing on fundamental citizen power and democratic authority, and the other requirements we might want to put on the utility company are well and good, but still, I think we need to focus on the fundamental one.
Lena? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. So when it comes to in our consumer protection plank of the Green Party, we specifically want policies to encourage citizens, taxpayers, ratepayers, and consumers to form citizens utility boards to advocate for public interest. What happened with is it Public Utility Board? What was it? The corruption that kind of spilled into the board too, because they were getting paid off.
Yeah, Randazzo.
Right. So how do we come out of it by creating a citizens utility board? And is that possible? Because that is part of our platform as well, to form citizen utility boards. So just like we talk about citizens police accountability boards and community boards. So is there a way to form a citizens utility board out of this?
So an alternative to the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio is what you're suggesting.
Yes.
Yeah, so something that has not been captured because we know PUCO has been captured, as has so many regulatory agencies, which basically, in a sense, were designed as in that way. With, if you look at the history of regulatory agencies going all the way back to the very first one, the Interstate Commerce Commission, actually that was created with the blessing of the regulated industry at the time of that entity, and that being the railroad companies. And the railroad companies liked this regulatory regime because it accomplished a couple of things. One, first, it took the sort of the heat off them. People who protested didn't show up to the railroad companies' offices or the like. They showed up to the utility or to the regulatory agency and sort of put pressure on them. Two, of course, the regulated, in this case, the railroad companies, could pressure whoever it is that appoints the regulators. Where have we seen that recently in connection with First Energy and Mr. Randazzo? And third, that even if the regulatory agencies somehow, fundamentally, do the right thing in a holistic way, they can always, the regulated can always go to court and use their ultimate quote unquote trump card and claim that this is a violation of their right to do business, corporate constitutional rights, and the like. So the regulated industries oftentimes like, and as Frank mentioned in this case, they prefer a regulated environment over an unregulated one because they can sort of direct the quote unquote regulations. Carla.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mike and Philena. Mike saying that we have to keep our eye on the ball about who's running the show, and that's what the charter revocation issue is about. And Philena talking about, replacing the the quote unquote Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. I think it's really important that legislators and bribers and regulators go to prison in this instance for a long, long time. This has to start happening because until people are going to prison for long periods of time, corporations, there's no accountability whatsoever. So of course, with revocation, you're hitting at the actual existence of the corporation. But we also have to make sure that these criminals are punished. And so that's kind of a two-front. I don't know that that was the purpose of our meeting tonight. We were really focused on revocation, and I agree with that. But I also really have to say these people have to go to jail. They have to go.
It can be both and should be both. Mike,
Yeah, the history of the citizens utility boards is they got going in the 70s. That was a spinoff of one of Ralph Nader's organizations. And they were created in a handful of states. But the purpose of these citizen utility boards was to provide resources for an independent body to fight utility companies at the public utility commissions. Now, if someone was going to create a citizens utility board today, it might have a different purpose, but the history of them is that it was to engage the regulatory agency, the state regulatory agency, with an independent body that had sufficient resources to do something. And here in Ohio, the Consumers Council was put into place as a way of short-circuiting a proposal for a citizens utility board. That happened in 1976. So we have the Consumers Council, and they get a budget, and they do some good work. But again, that is saying that the regulatory scheme is okay, and we will let the utility companies continue to run the show, and we'll try to deal with their excesses in some way. So if you want to get out from underneath the public utility oversight of utility company, public power is the way to do that. And that can be done on a municipality by municipality basis, at least here in Ohio, unless the law has changed to allow some bigger formulation.
Philena mentions in the chat, HB 6 still hasn't even been revoked. It has been partially revoked, but not totally. And so, yeah, they haven't even done that in spite of what's going on. Never mind, none of these people have yet gone to prison, including Householder. And so what, they try to do is delay, both at an individual level to avoid accountability. And now First Energy is trying to, drag their corporate collective feet and, hold things up as much as possible, and hope, as we've seen this play done many, many times before. Other questions? I'll just say in terms of, oh, I'm sorry, Sandy, go ahead.
Just wondering in general, how is Yoast reacting to these requests? And then related, but somewhat different territory, when are these trials going to start? Are they going to start? Is there going to be, I don't even know the other names, but other than Householder, I mean, it seems like it's out of the papers these days. Are there going to be trials?
Yeah, others may have a better idea of that, but in terms of Yoast, we've heard from an attorney. It's his name Campbell, I think. I can look it up. He's been the one point person that's responded to Gary Hauser and myself. He's sort of the lead attorney in the case, and so to what extent they are sincere in doing this, we don't know. Yoast is up for election. This may be sort of a convenient entity to go after. I'd like to think there's some sincerity behind this. We don't know, but it seems legitimate heretofore until proven otherwise. But we feel that it certainly doesn't hurt to put pressure on his office and try to make that pressure as public as possible via this petition, via doing other public things. There's been some discussion of maybe having something in front of the State House as well to coincide with maybe if we can get a state legislator to introduce if Yoast is, held up in doing this. There's no reason why there couldn't be a two front. One, in terms of Yoast pursuing this in court. And the second is trying to get something pursued in the state legislature via a state legislator calling for the revocation or the dissolution of First Energy. So if that's the case, maybe a good action could be to do something in front of the State House. Don't know how that resonates with any of you. And there's a number of chats related to citizen utility boards. Why don't we take one or two more comments or questions before we sort of begin to wrap up? Russ. You are muted.
I'm sorry. I put in the post, I was wondering if we couldn't contact the county prosecutor and ask her to initiate actions to revoke the charter. This is a Summit County corporation, and she's posted that she's going to prosecute all criminals and protect all citizens. So maybe we should be petitioning her to take action along with Yost.
So is Sherry Bevan-Walsh still the county prosecutor, or has she moved on?
Yes, I believe so.
She's been there a while.
Yes.
Well, if you're interested, I'm willing to work with you, and we can try to get some other reps, individuals in the county to, as county residents, to call on her to do that.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm a county resident. Are you still a
Right.
county resident, or are you in Chicago?
I'm Caga, but I still know quite a few people in Summit. Okay, Michael. And then Connie.
Hello, I've been dropping in and out, but the charter in the Detroit Edison charter, it's chartered in the public good. And I wonder if there might be a jury trial to let the public decide if it's in the public good.
Good question. We'd like to think it shouldn't have to go that far, that the state has the power itself to take unilateral action on behalf of we the people. Going to court and sort of using this quo warranto, I don't know, sort of the legal possibilities of that. It's worthwhile exploring. Connie?
One final question. What was the provision in House Bill 6 that they rescinded where they were averaging the profits of Ohio Edison, Toledo Edison, and CEI? What was that called? That was rescinded.
I frankly do not know. Does someone on this call know? They could put in the chat.
Because I think there's a piece of legislation floating around now in the General Assembly to consolidate Ohio Edison, CEI, and Toledo Edison for that exact purpose. So that if one company's not profitable, everything will be averaged to make.
Right. Yeah, I do know that they have, First Energy has tried to combine for
Right.
their entities. Maybe David knows. David? Your hand's up.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I was late for the meeting. I was just wondering if there was any discussion at all about the movement to change the name of the stadium, First Energy Stadium, and how that this effort would relate to that in any way, take advantage of that.
Well, it is, of course, symbolic. Casey, I believe is his name, a Cleveland, city of Cleveland councilperson, has introduced legislation, a resolution calling for the yanking of the First Energy name off of Cleveland Municipal Stadium, which is municipally owned, technically. There is going to be a hearing on that question Monday evening. 10 individuals will have an opportunity to provide a whopping 3 minutes of public comments calling for that. First 10 people to get in can provide comments. I'm one of them. I signed up early this afternoon. So I'm going to use that as an opportunity to make the connections and try to use this as an educational and organizing tool. And any of you who are in the Cuyahoga County area, hey, we're all paying taxes to underwrite that stadium. So by all means, write, call, email, city council, county council, newspapers, blogs, Twitters, you know, my TwitFace, whatever you got at your disposal to get the word out. Please do so. It's a good angle. It's a good hook. And we should always use those kinds of hooks that are available to get on the other side of the learning curve for people. So at this point, I wanted to give both Mike and Philena an opportunity to provide some closing comments. And then I just wanted to reiterate a few things that we've got up our sleeves at Move to Amend Ohio network. So let's go in reverse order. Mike, you have anything you want to close with?
Well, I think I made the points that I wanted to make during the discussion. I would be interested to see what sort of recommendations, next steps sort of thing, to see whether as a network around Ohio, we would prioritize pressuring Yoast and some tactics to do that, or, you know, whatever the next steps might be. So I guess that's my interest at this point.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Philena.
I enjoyed the brainstorming here. I think that we covered a lot of grounds, and that's really what makes it work. I would say another closing was to focus on, will this lower the cost of our utilities if we do this, and how we can lower the cost, because in you know, at the end of the day, that's what people are going to be concerned of, like, will this lower my cost of electricity? Will doing this to First Energy lower my cost? Will having citizen utility boards lower my cost? That really will help groundswell some movement here, because ever since this happened, our utilities has been skyrocketing. So we have to focus on, you know, how it affects each individual to really get them to mobilize.
Great. Thank you, Philena, and thank you, Mike. You know, there's been some discussion, Move to Amend Ohio network, of, you know, what our role should be in all of this. As you may know, Move to Amend is focused on a passage of a 28th constitutional amendment that would abolish the twin bizarre constitutional doctrines of money being defined as First Amendment protected free speech and corporate entities being defined as people or persons. And there is a corporate personhood angle to this issue, by the way. First Energy has been trying to foot drag in not providing and disclosing information. There's been some utterances of, well, we don't have to do that. You know, information that's proprietary, First Amendment right or Fourth Amendment rights. But more recently, they have very recently in court argued, because there's been some fines imposed on First Energy for not complying with various rules, something like $10,000 a day. And they've gone to court and saying that's a violation of our cruel and unusual punishment right, constitutional right under the 8th Amendment. So they are claiming constitutional rights of human persons, that being against cruel and unusual punishment regarding being fined 10 grand per day. And they did this presumably with a straight face, at least their attorneys. So there is a connection there. The end all be all is not revoking a corporate charter, it's revoking their rights to decide. It should be the right of us to decide, human beings, over these artificial legal fictions. But a stepping stone to that is to assert or to reassert our ability to define these creations. And thus we feel that at a state level, and even at a municipal level, by trying to organize and put pressure here in Ohio anyway, and not every state has this possibility of quo warranto and doing what might be done by state legislators or by initiating revocation calls by county prosecutors. So let's play that card. And so in terms of next steps, they will include continuing to circulate the petition, number one. So please do share that far and wide within your circles. Two, the documents, the media coverage that we've received so far, please share that. It has some good information, some historical, but also describes where we are with the Attorney General's office. Three, we've been in touch with our Revolution Ohio that here is shortly willing to work with us and others, maybe some of you, to develop some kind of letter writing campaign that could complement or supplement the petitioning going on. Four is this prosecution with prosecutors. Fifth is, raising the alternatives. We may not have the perfect or know enough about what public power may look like, but the concept of that we should not take as a default, that the only choice we have is private, corporate, public, or provided power by corporate entities should not be our only choice. There's been calls, for example, in California against Pacific Gas and Electric, the company that has caused the massive wildfires there, to revoke their corporate charter. And that's picked up a little bit of steam. If there's any company that should have its charter revoked, it should be PG&E, and maybe First Energy is 1 or 1A right behind them. And sort of lastly is we hope to keep this discussion going. We have plans to have these sort of an open forum every couple of weeks. We initially talked about 2 weeks from now, inviting people to come back together and just sort of give an update with one another. Maybe not as formal as tonight with speakers, but just, hey, here we are. Maybe we'll invite Dennis, see if Dennis wants to come on. There were a few other people that we had thought about inviting initially to this call as well. So, that may be an option. So we had initially thought about 2 weeks from tonight. It turns out 2 weeks is my wife's birthday. So I'm going to make a unilateral decision of not having it 2 weeks from tonight, but instead 3 weeks. So I'm asking for your blessing and permission. And if you are interested, 3 weeks from tonight, to gather together again, if you are so inclined, bring a friend, and we'll just sort of give an update. There's stuff happening. We know at the legislative level, in courts, there's actions, a number of environmental groups in the state, Ohio Environmental Council, Citizen Action, they all have stuff going on. We can kind of give a check-in on that, give a check-in on what we're doing, and hear, report, and strategize on what any of you are doing. So that's what we are up to. That's what we are suggesting. And with that, hope you will join us. We will send out an invitation. And those of us who registered for this call, whether you were on it or just registered and couldn't be on it, I will send out a couple of documents that may be relevant, including a 2-page summary of our Citizens Over Corporations. So if you don't want to purchase the whole booklet, there's sort of a cheat sheet that gives some of the quotes that Mike referred to that I will include in that summary. So with that, we are about at time. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Greg, I just want to say, Greg, sorry, there's somebody had asked about saving the chat. I just want to make sure people know how to do that. Somebody else wrote in the chat, thank you. But if you want to save the chat, look over to the chat area, and there's 3 little points, 3 little dots, and it says save chat. You can save it there.
I will make sure that when we send out a link to the recording. I don't know if, we had sort of said if people didn't want to go on camera, they won't necessarily have the chat. So I don't necessarily want to send, I mean, there's a way after the fact to send out the chat. So I'm not going to do that because I didn't promise that I would do that. So if you want to save the chat, I'm going to give you a minute to do that before I close out. And the way to do that again, click those three little buttons, and there is something, your very first choice at the top should be to save chat. The other way sort of is just to sort of run your, hold your mouse down and scroll over the whole thing and sort of copy and paste it that way. So for anybody want to do that, give you a few more seconds. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for taking the time. Feel free to reach out. You can reach us. You can reach me at greg@movetomen.org. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, queries, feel free to do that. And the 22nd will be the next time we get together, same time. Thank you ever so much. Good night.
Thank you, Philena. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So Mike, bye-bye.